This is the Vancer ICE pad, and believe it or not, it's actually infused with fiberglass. Why, you might ask? Well, because doing that just so happens to create an incredibly fast and low friction surface. This mousepad is amongst the fastest cloth pads that you'll probably ever find, and I've been putting it to the test. Here's what I think about it. First of all, when I took the mousepad out of the box, it didn't lay flat. I then tried to flatten it out by rolling it up the reverse way, and this did work. However, I wouldn't recommend doing this. Normally on any other cloth pad, this method works perfectly fine, but on this one, because it's infused with fiberglass, I accidentally made a crease when doing this. But thankfully, the pad did go flat after a few hours of using it, and I hardly ever noticed the crease. I was also very pleased that it came with a microfiber cloth, which is definitely something you'll need if you're going to be using this pad, because any type of sweat or moisture will show up on this pad, and it is recommended to keep one of these nearby and wipe it off from time to time, because it does slightly change the glide if you don't. Speaking of the glide, this thing is fast. It's easily the most fun glide I've ever experienced on a cloth mousepad. Mine did have a little bit of a break-in period. When I first unboxed it, it was incredibly fast, but then after using it for a few days, it did slow down just a little bit, but it's still a very fast pad. It does still have a hint of stopping power, but it's definitely a lot less than what I was already used to. If you do decide to try this pad, just know it will take some time to adjust, especially if you're coming from a control pad. But if you play a lot of fast-paced games like arena shooters or Apex that require a lot of tracking, it might be worth it. It did take getting used to in the beginning because of how fast it is, but once I got more adjusted, I found it to be a very pleasant experience when tracking. Now, I am still a little less consistent than I was, but frankly, I think I need a little more time to get used to the pad. I will say that initially, most people are probably going to be tempted to turn down their sensitivity when switching to this pad, but what I actually found is that raising my sensitivity seemed to help me more. And I think that's because on this particular surface, it really gives you freedom of movement with your fingers. And using a slightly higher sense lets you take advantage of that. But using low sensitivity on this mousepad was very fun as well. In a sense, it almost makes using low sensitivity more viable. Even though this pad is primarily beneficial for tracking heavy games, I did still try it in some tactical shooters too, and I honestly thought it was going to be a lot harder than it was. It's not ideal for everyone, but if you're someone that already prefers speed pads, I think you could easily make this work for something like CSGO or Valorant. It would just take a little bit of practice. The pad is 4mm thick, so you might be led to believe that it's very squishy, but it's really not. It's actually rather firm. You are able to get a little bit more control out of the pad by pressing down hard enough, but it is really limited compared to what you would get with a softer cushion. But the trade-off here is you do get a little bit more consistency in the glide. Now, in terms of size, it measures in at 45 centimeters by 40 centimeters, which I think is a very acceptable size for a mousepad. Anything less starts to become questionable whether you have enough space, and anything larger than that is always nice but not necessary. Although it would be awesome if they came out with an extended version, or even just a 500mm by 500mm. Moving along, as I mentioned in my first impressions video, the surface is a lot smoother than what you might expect. It does have a little bit of texture to it, it's not entirely smooth, but I don't think it's rough enough to irritate anyone's skin. In terms of build quality, the stitching was really solid, although it does sit a little higher than the rest of the pad, and you can feel it rubbing on your arm when you make vertical movements, although it's not horrific. The one suggestion I have here is I would rather have the tag on the outside of the pad instead of facing inwards like this. Thankfully, it is out of the way and I never really use that corner of the pad, but it still would be nice if it was on the outside. If you think this would bother you, you could just always cut it off. One thing I think Vancer did a really nice job with is the rubber base on the bottom of the pad. It had a lot of traction and I never felt this thing move around on my desk while I was gaming with it. I've got nothing to really gripe about. This is a great mousepad. But of course, the main concern with something like this is going to be lifespan. Eventually, the coating will wear down, and it's just a matter of when. We saw this with other glass-infused pads like the Artisan Shidenkai and the ICE pad, but Vancer's claim that this pad should last longer. I've personally never owned either of those products, and since the Vancer ICE is brand new to the market, we can't really be quite sure just yet. It's going to take some time before anyone knows the lifespan of the Vancer ICE. But if it does wear down over the next few months, I will update the video description. If it holds up over time, I could easily see this thing becoming my main pad, if the lifespan's good enough. It won't be for everyone, but if you're looking for a really low friction cloth pad, this might be worth checking out. And of course, I want to give a huge thank you to Vancer for sending this pad out to review.